4, 3. Welcome to today's episode of Talent Strategy 60. I am your friendly neighborhood talent strategy nerd, Dr. Jim. And this is not the first time that our great panelists have heard that intro. And if LB was here, he would be giggling like he usually does. So today we have a phenomenal show planned with a ton of key learnings that we're going to deliver. We're going to learn how the pandemic shifted the world of work in tech and the impact that it's had on employees. We're going to learn what new challenges that shift in work arrangements in being remote and hybrid presents to the cause of building great cultures. And then lastly, we're going to learn how we're going to learn some key culture building best practices when it comes to working in remote and hybrid tech environments. So a lot of ground to cover, and to bring us into the discussion and guide us through the discussion and teach us all this stuff, we have a great panel of guests joining us, and they are all in the world of high growth startup tech. We'll take a little bit of time to introduce everybody and set the stage. So panelists, welcome to the show. Thanks for your time. I'm going to start off with Viji. Viji, introduce yourself to the audience and say hello. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm the VP of Engineering for VoiceOps. We are a startup that works in the contact center space. We actually help make contact centers, reps really efficient at their work by providing coaching opportunities, by analyzing the calls and providing coaching opportunities for their managers. This has become really important with contact centers, with the contact center space changing rapidly and becoming a lot more remote, with a remote workforce and global teams. And we're building a brand new product, exciting brand new product in this space. So that's where I work now. I've been with VoiceOps for about a year and a half. And prior to that, I had been consulting for a number of startups for almost 7 years, mostly in the AI space, so computer vision and a little bit of NLP, but mostly in the computer vision space. And prior to that, where I really met Jim was when I was in the Chicagoland area for about 15 years. I worked for Rotary International. I started off as a systems engineer. And then when I left, I was director of IT, overseeing our global team of IT professionals. So that's my background. It's really started off in ERP products and then evolved. I had to reskill and evolved into a lot more of AI at the moment.
Awesome stuff, Viji. If you can you share with us a little bit about why you were drawn to VoiceOps as an organization? Because I think that's an important part of everybody's story that I want to get out for the audience that's listening and watching.
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned, VoiceOps is helping contact center representatives get better at their jobs. And what's interesting to me is that about 70% of contact center reps are women, and many of them are, probably, in the low to medium income category. And there's a lot of turnover in the space. So to me personally, it's really important that I work in an area where tech enables and helps people in their roles, especially in the social sector. If it's able to make people, a lot of women or disadvantaged groups, whoever that may be, or the environment or any of these kind of spaces, if tech is able to enable and help that, then I feel really good and motivated about doing that job. So generally, that's one of the criteria I use in, selecting, a job, really.
Great stuff. And it's been pretty consistent throughout your career. And like you said, you and I have known each other for a while. So I appreciate you sharing that. Ali, you're up next. So tell us about all the great things that you're doing. And, feel free to throw in some of your world travels in there as well.
Ali Al Jabry. I'm Kenyan Saudi living in St. Louis now. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Kwema, and we created the world's first smart badge reel that basically adds a layer of safety for frontline staff in hospital settings where, unfortunately, the industry is plagued with a lot of violence. 80% of all workplace violence happens in hospitals. So we created a novel way to get help when these situations happen while maintaining a level of calmness that doesn't escalate a situation, right? Because it starts with verbal violence and can easily escalate to physical. So when the verbal violence or signs of verbal violence starts, you normally want to already call for help and ideally get a response within 30 to 2 minutes from a security or a behavioral health response team. So yeah, I've been doing this for about 5.5 years. Have done everything you can think of within a company, within a startup. We've been building teams for over 10 years. This is my second startup, so this is right up my alley. I've lived in Latin America. I grew up in the Middle East. I've lived in Africa as well. Was just in Korea for about a month. Came back a week ago to the US. So this is something I'm very passionate about, and I think it's such an interesting time because we've been doing this for a while, and COVID just made it, I want to say, a bit easier, but still allowed us to excel in the way we build culture remotely. So yeah, excited to be along with this.
Great stuff, Ali. Thanks for sharing. I think one thing that I feel is important for you to get out in terms of your story is the genesis for the product. So share with us a little bit about how the product came to be, because I think that's a really interesting component of how you thought of the product and brought it to market. So share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was what, about, I want to say 6 years ago, my co-founders and I had a scenario where a close friend in Latin America was kidnapped, unfortunately. And the way it worked was that she was leaving the airport and had asked her mom to wait for her at home with cab money. On her way home, she didn't make it home, unfortunately. The cab was in on a kidnapping kind of ring. And because her mom was waiting to pay for the cab and expecting her to be home within a certain number of time, that prompted her to be like, what happened to her? Where is she? Like, something's wrong. Started asking her friends and making that news ultimately become viral. And that in itself saved her life. So the fact that this problem, which is actually a lot more common than most people know, prompted us to think, what if we could replicate that? And that's kind of how Kwema was born initially. And we ended up creating wearable devices more focused on femicide or gender-based violence, and in that process found a more effective way to actually save lives and not just create panic and chaos. So it's a crazy journey, and I think the thing that hasn't changed is the passion behind it, right?
Yeah, that's real great, real solid stuff, and a really powerful backstory. And then our third panelist, last but certainly not least, is Melissa Moody. Melissa, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about who you are, your story, and especially the bit about the noise canceling headphones for your email.
Yeah. Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me. And so good to be here with everyone. I am CMO and co-founder of a company called Gated. And as Jim just introduced, we are the noise canceling headphones for email, which essentially means it's a very different way of thinking about email, which is where you actually are setting a boundary to see if all the stuff coming in is worth your time before you spend hours sorting through it. So yeah, we reduce the inbox volume to kind of quiet the chaos a little bit. And the other fun part about it is that we actually create benefit for charity along the way. So when people try to reach you that you don't know, they are going to make a donation to a nonprofit of your choosing. And so it's kind of a win-win-win. Senders get through, you get a quieter inbox, and nonprofits see a little bit of value. So having a lot of fun building that company. We are building a fully remote team from the get-go. So this has been a really interesting journey, starting without anything in place and just building. We really didn't start hiring until early 2021, late 2020. And so we are bringing together a team bit by bit in a world that's already remote for us. We are fairly global in our team right now. We kind of started with a North and South American team. We'll probably build out bigger as we get bigger. And then the other piece, I think one of the other reasons Jim enjoyed pulling me into this call was because before the pandemic, I worked for 14 years at Google and was working almost for 5 years remotely before the pandemic. So I had an experience which is very interesting in the sense of working at a very large company, obviously very global company, pre-pandemic and then in the pandemic, and seeing that shift and seeing the changes that occurred. So yeah, I bring a little bit of the big company and ground level small startup company at the same time. Glad to be here. Really excited for the conversation. I've been long passionate about remote work, so I'm excited for this.
Yeah, it's going to be really a really fun conversation. I think one of the things that I want to call out right now is that all three of you belong to and are driving companies that have a fairly strong social impact component to it in their DNA. And I know that this isn't directly related to the topic that we're talking about, but I would venture to guess that social impact has a really strong influence in just being able to build your culture in general. So and I'll open this up to anybody on the floor. What have you seen in terms of your ability to attract talent based on the social impact components of each of your company's line of work? I'm just going to volunteer somebody. Ali, you're on mute, so I'm going to pick you first.
Awesome. Honestly, that's probably one of the first things I look to hire or have onboard people under, not only employees, but also advisors or people who can roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty at an advisor capacity. It's always a North Star that I like people to be on board with when what we do, right? Because at the end of the day, that's the real North Star, not necessarily financial gain or stocks or anything like that, right? So the way we like to do that is to make sure we have a healthy understanding of what is success for that person. Is it knowing that, hey, I came up with this idea that could be implemented and it actually came to life, and because of that we have the capability of like impacting, 1 million nurses or 500,000 nurses, or I have an international reach. Actually, like, my mom's a nurse. I get your problem. I know exactly what you're doing, right? Like, or my sister's a nurse, or my closest friend's a nurse, right? So like, that's the kind of stuff that we've been really fortunate to accidentally find in the people we bring on board, and it gives us a competitive advantage when it comes to getting awesome talent and access to people who've been there, done that.
Viji, what's been your experience in terms of the social impact and your ability to attract talent?
The angle I would take is actually the ability of anybody who works at VoiceOps or any successful person at VoiceOps would be the ability to put themselves in another person's shoes and experience what they're experiencing. And that's critical for building a strong, great product. And if you're able to do that really well, like, if you're able to put yourself in the shoes of a representative, contact center representative who is listening and, answering calls every day. And in fact, I recently I volunteered for, the elections here in Georgia, just so that I could experience that myself. Like, so I was in a phone bank making these calls to people and then seeing how, like, so, very quickly they want to try and, disconnect from you, right? Like, they don't have time. They're like, just get it done with, and you have a script to follow. So how are you doing this while they're trying to hang up? So that ability to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and experience the day as they experience it is critical. So that empathy that somebody, like people have, is that empathy, and that ability to do that is critical in our like hiring decisions. It becomes super important because actually it actually benefits us to be able to build a product that people will use. Otherwise, really won't use it. So
I love. Oh, you're on mute, Jim, but I'm going to take over from Viji there. I love that connection of empathy to the product, right? I love that idea of like, you need to have that understanding of the product itself and how users are in it and how that ties into, hiring someone with passion and with empathy. I was going to add to, just tie it to remote work, this idea that there are new ways of working in the world now, and the remote work is very much a new way of working. And I do think companies with a social good component are very much a new way of working, like building companies that have this thread of, sometimes it's built into the product, sometimes it's tangential. But I do think overall, it's a new way of working. I mean, we are shifting how we work so dramatically over the last 10, 15 years that it's no longer I go to work and then I give on the side. It starts to become one and the same, which I think is similar to kind of what we're going to talk about when it comes to remote work. I will say the other thing I love about the social good component is when it comes to hiring, we stopped putting out these job recommendations and we turned it into much more of what we call a job invitation, which is here's who we are as a company. This is what we expect people to believe and to be passionate about. If you're interested, you come and let us know. And honestly, by flipping that, the quality of applications just skyrocketed because it really takes someone who says, I'm not just going to apply to a standard role, but I have something that I really can bring, or I'm deeply passionate. So I think the social good component really helps transform your hiring process as well, and the way you meet with people.
Awesome discussion so far. I mean, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about each of your answers is that you're leading at the organizational level with the organizational why. Why do we do what we do? And then are you somebody who believes what we believe and you want to come join us in our mission? And I think that alignment of mission, vision, values is central to any sort of culture building effort or exercise that you're doing. So it's great that you call that out. Now, I think we have a good sense of how the pandemic has impacted the world of work, and especially in tech. I think one of the things that that's worth talking about is how it's impacted employees. Now, you're in a hybrid or remote environment. We know what work looked like through the pandemic. That's pretty obvious for most people. But what's been the impact at the employee level? And the reason why I'm asking this question, it ties into a question that was popped in a chat by Scott of Addison Group. One of the challenges that he's found is that whenever he's leading a team, whenever there's hybrid days where people are remote, it's the motivation factor becomes a little bit more challenging. So when you look at the employee impact of a hybrid or remote work arrangement, what's happening at the employee level, and how have you managed to get closer with your employees in that sort of setup? And I want to lead it off with Melissa on answering that question.
I love this one. I'll speak a little bit from personal experience as an employee, but thinking back when I was at Google, but also as from a managing side now at Gated. I think the real key that I like to hone in is the concept of autonomy. I think what's really interesting is we used to say, oh, I see my employees sitting in the desk, and so I trust that they're working. When that goes away, you all of a sudden have to put in processes that let you see, are they working? Now, the key here is you have to trust that they're going to work in a lot of different ways. And so instead of seeing the butt in seat, as we used to talk about, it becomes much more about setting a goal, communicating goals, communicating what you expect, and then actually giving that space to let them work. So this idea of like, are they working? Is there productivity? Honestly, it shouldn't matter. What should matter is, are the goals being hit? Are the deliverables being put out? Because there's a beauty in saying, I don't care how you get the work done. For me, when quick personal story, when I was at Google, I had to leave. I thought I was actually going to have to quit. And my managing director made it work so that I could be remote. This was probably 4 years pre-pandemic. And the depth of trust in that and the depth of responsibility to say, you hit your goals. I don't care how you do it. You hit them. If you need to balance work and kids, if you need to work more at night, because that's how your mental process goes, do what you have to do as a human. Just get the work done. And I think if you think of it that way, in a positive way, like you don't have to watch every step, then it's really good. Yes, you do need to hold people responsible, right? Like you may have things where people aren't hitting those goals and you need to sit down and talk with them about how they could do that better. But I think the beauty in letting people work autonomously is actually a really, really powerful thing.
That's great insight, and thanks for sharing, Melissa. I think it's on point. And one of the things that struck me about what you just said is that, earmuffs for anybody that's listening, we're all grown ass adults around here, right? So the idea that you have to manage at a super granular level all the task related stuff is really backwards in terms of how professionals in the world of work actually work. So I love that you call that out, is that, if you want to build an effective culture and have it be really production oriented, focus on the outcomes. It doesn't matter like how it gets done. What matters is that it gets done. So I think that's a great call out. Ali, I want to get your input on this because you're world traveling and you have team. Well, everybody's got teams everywhere, but I'm kind of making fun. But how have you dealt with that scenario or situation where you're taking into account the employee impact of remote work and leaning into it to make everybody more effective?
Yeah, that's a great way to frame the question. I think for starters, it's like that cheesy tagline that's always on LinkedIn, like, what if we train them and they leave? It's like, what if we don't and they stay? Think of it the same way in a trust standpoint, right? Like, what if I'm paying this person full time and they're actually like working somewhere else? You're gonna find out sooner or later. So it's good to trust as initial guideline. But more importantly, I think it's more about cohesiveness and a culture match, and believing, not forcing somebody to be a cookie cutter approach. So for example, some of our developers like to work at night. They can work at night. They can work from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. if they want to. That's fine. As long as there's enough time to be cohesive, I don't know, one day every 10 days, or they have stand-up hours. Like they can figure out that compatibility together. And I think one of the beauties is that our team likes the idea of either working remotely so they can spend more time with their daughters, their kids, with their sons, right, with their family, and then they come in twice as hard when their kids are asleep, right? Like that's amazing. Or they're excited because they get to have the opportunity to fly to South Korea. Like my CTO, who's from Peru originally, is actually in South Korea right now. He gets to spend about 4 months there working with his team. And I was like, are you going to have like a time difference issue? He was like, no, because all our developers have kids and they love working at night. So like I have even better cohesion with them now that I'm in South Korea. And I was like, wow, I would not have thought that, right? So it's just like the fact that you have a trust, you build that opportunity to bring togetherness. For people in the same city, like I sponsor a dinner or a drink out if they meet up. Like, hey, if you guys meet up, we're paying for the bill, right? Like we're not forcing them to say, hey, every Tuesday, every Wednesday, go meet up. We're just like, hey, if you guys meet up, we'll pay for the dinner and drinks. So go have fun, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that helps bring a healthy, and is working for us at least.
Nice. Now, I think Viji, I'm particularly interested in your perspective because your organization serves an audience that we typically think need to be on site, call center reps and that sort of stuff. But you're actually delivering technology solutions to globalize that environment. And I'm sure that there's some impact there in terms of your observations on employees and also how managers and leaders should adjust kind of their expectations and their outcomes focus to that. So tell us a little bit about what you've observed in dealing with that dynamic.
Yeah, actually, so there are a couple things. What Melissa said about trusting that the employees will do the job and not really micromanaging them is super important. There's another side to that, though. The side is that it is really important that is built on very strong communication both ways, because this trust can only be built when the manager is clearly communicating what the expectations are, and the employee is responding by communicating where they are with the work. If that communication breaks down or doesn't go well, then that's where the trust begins to be lost. So that's super important. The other thing that happens with global teams is, for the first time, many a time, people are working with people from very, very different cultures. So like Ali was saying, he has this manager from Peru who is now in Korea and, working with probably a team in the US. And, so now, and these cultures are like very different in terms of communication style, expectations of managers, in terms of like, what you will say, what you will write, what you will not say. And so for a number of years, like 7 years, like Melissa, I was, before the pandemic hit, even I was working remotely I was a consultant with, a number of startups around the world, around Europe and South Africa and in the US, and had worked with people literally from so many different countries, and and you need to give people the benefit of doubt and ask very specific open-ended questions. So you can't just assume, like, if somebody didn't say something, they didn't get the work done, you can't just assume that they're like slacking off. You need to ask open-ended questions. So if somebody say, it's working slowly and you're not able to identify why, you say that I have noticed that your productivity is not like what I thought it should be. What do how can I help you, or what do you think will help you get there? And then they might tell you, like, how what is actually impeding them. So, and not only like understanding the culture, but also how you're going to communicate. Is this going to be on a face-to-face, on a Slack message, an email? All of these things are also super important. So there are many aspects to unpack there with regards to communication.
Yeah, I mean, it's all of you have shared a lot of stuff that could be a show in and of itself. I think one of the big things that I want to call out is the foundation of trust. It starts there, and then you have open communication that flows from there. Those are all key elements of culture building. And I think one of the common threads that I see among all three of your answers is that you generally want to operate assuming positive intent. I think historically there's been this division between managers and employees where you go into an interaction assuming that something got screwed up, and that forces employees to kind of shrink and say, oh, I'm in trouble again. So I think if you start with trust, if you start with positive intent, and you operate that way on a consistent basis, you have the foundations for strong culture building. I want to call out something that was mentioned in the chat from the audience, and this was Niraj from Meta. One of the things that he points out was that he's hearing that in order to have highly collaborative environments or high levels of collaboration, and I'm using air quotes, you need to be on site. And his position is, with the technology and tools that are available, I don't know if that makes sense, and I'm paraphrasing for him. When you look at that argument and you pair it, and this is an argument that comes from typically larger organizations. In fact, one of the former VPs of Microsoft said that when it comes to transition out of the pandemic, the operating philosophy is that we have to boil the frog when it comes to getting employees back on site. Meaning, if you throw a frog into boiling water, it's going to jump right out. But what you do is, if you want to cook it, you turn the heat up slowly so it doesn't notice. So sorry for the graphic description, but that's what boiling the frog means. And what Niraj is hinting at is the boiling the frog effort to get people on site. And what I want to get your take on is, when you look at hybrid and remote work and how that fits into the startup world, what are your observations in terms of the long-term viability of remote work and hybrid work versus what the large Fortune 100s or 50s are planning on doing, which is getting everybody back on site? And specifically when we're looking at collaboration too. So that's a long question, but you get where I'm going. Ali, the floor is yours. I want to get your take on it, and then we'll move to Melissa and Viji on the same question.
Well,
you have to solve all of those problems in 30 seconds. I'm putting the clock on you right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some benefit to being elbow to elbow, right? Like it's good. I don't know if it has to be every day. I don't know if it has to be every month. I think there is some benefit in having some like on-site like huddle where it's like, hey, let's work together and bring even more cohesion. But I still believe it's possible to do that same thing virtually, because it's a more consistent game, and the benefits of personal, professional outweigh the benefits of only professional in person, because you sacrifice commute. Like, some people are spending 3 hours, like in Mexico City, where you have an office, like it's 3 hours a day that you go back and forth to the office. So that in itself will build resentment of some sort, because that's 3 hours a day, and multiply that by a month and a year. It's a lot of time you could have spent with your kids, right? So I feel that if you want to have if you want to have employees that are healthy, don't have burnout or creep, like, it's really important to prioritize those things. Now, some people want to work close to each other, elbow to elbow. That's fine, but it's not a one size fits all kind of approach. And from what I'm seeing, I saw a lot of companies roll back on their virtual work policies, right? Like, I feel that's going to be a huge disservice for themselves, because they're not going to get access to a lot of talent because of that, and they're going to have to use other variables that are not sustainable, right? Like, it's a shiny object that then ends up losing your position in getting the best talent or getting the most passionate talent, right? Because I'd rather have somebody who's more passionate than somebody who's amazing, right? And that passion will then lead to growth, and that growth will then lead to success and results, and even more passion and even more leadership, right? So I think that's kind of how I would frame that answer, if that is even an answer.
No, I think it's solid insight. And I appreciate you sharing that. Melissa, I know that you have some thoughts on it. And with you being, I think everybody here on the panel is in a unique situation, but Melissa, you're in Alaska. So,
Oh, yeah.
Getting people to commute to an on-site location in Alaska would probably be pretty challenging. And I think you have some interesting solutions to that you've executed. So what have you noticed?
Yeah, I mean, and even Alaska aside, I think me, Jim. I like to think not about what could and should be, but what we're actually seeing, like what is actually happening in front of our faces. And there's two things that I've noticed recently that I think play directly into what we're talking about here. The first is a lot of what the conversations I'm hearing of, and even the conversation we're having today, are of people who are a little further along in their career. And we are thrilled to, be able to balance work and life and kids. But there is a chunk of the younger generation, and I've been talking to quite a few of these, even as we go through hiring, who are not getting that in-office networking, collaboration, even the social life that probably a lot of us had at our first jobs, right? And I think that's a really interesting observation. I'm not exactly sure I have the answer for how we get that to them, but I think it's good to admit it, to say the younger generation, whether or not they want to be in an office, is missing that close networking that we probably all had. So how do we get that to them? That's a whole nother episode, right? The other thing I think that is like right in front of our face, which I'm kind of laughing about, is look at the people that are going into hybrid environments right now. I don't believe, at least right now, for a lot of these situations, that they're getting what we have in our mind as elbow to elbow collaboration. They're going into offices on rotating schedules. They are hot desking. They're not all sitting at their same desk and seeing each other. The hybrid situation that many companies are in right now, like Reddit and Microsoft, is not the same as one day remote and one day just like it always used to be in the office. It's a very different look and feel. So candidly, I'm not sure we're ever going to be back at the world that we were 10 years ago, where everybody went in on the same day and everybody did their commute and they all showed up at the same time and they all left. I don't think we're ever going to be back that. Even if you have a back in office vibe, there's always going to be a little bit more of this, like, well, for certain days people are not here. And I mean, unless a company just says straight up, nope, we're all in the office every day. Here we go.
Yeah,
we're never going to be there again, but maybe that's a little negative.
I think if any company decides to go that blanket, we're all back in the office, that's going to bode well for all three of the panelists here, because your hiring is going to go through the roof, because that would be a bad move.
I just read a stat on this. It said something to the effect of, and I'll try to find the source for us so I can quote it, but it's something to the effect of like 40% of people would take a 10% pay cut to work from home. People were taking pay cuts to not come in. I mean, that's significant.
I mean, and Viji, I'm going to come to you in just a second. It's interesting. You don't really realize what you're missing out on until you experience it. And the reason why I mentioned that out loud is that before the pandemic, I lived in the north suburbs of Chicago, and I was commuting more than an hour to Milwaukee as I was building out the IT staffing practice that I was doing before I moved over to Circa. And some days that could be, like 4 hours of road time. And Viji knows what I'm talking about, because she's lived in the Chicagoland area, and you can't get anywhere in less than 45 minutes. So, that's one aspect of it. As soon as the pandemic hit, I didn't even calculate my actual operating rhythm schedule, because I would wake up at 4 o'clock to get to the gym and then be in traffic by like 5 o'clock to get to the office by a certain amount of time to get my day started. And then here we are, we're 100% remote. And all of a sudden I'm like, I have like 7 hours back in my day. And you look at the productivity that happened across the country. Every company pretty much said our productivity has gone through the roof, our employees are happier, all this sort of stuff. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if I think, Melissa, you're dead on when you say I don't think we'll ever go back to that, because people are well aware of what they missed out on in, what can be called the hustle culture aspect of what it was before the pandemic hit. Viji, I want to circle to you and look and talk a little bit about, hey, if you see this gradual shift into more on-site work, how do you think that's going to impact your ability to build, grow, and scale your teams in that startup or accelerating growth setup?
Yeah, actually, for a lot of startups, that's not even an option anymore to go on site, because we used to have an office in San Francisco, and so of course the pool of people we could hire was from the San Francisco area, which also meant that you were paying big bucks for the talent. And now, now that we've gone completely remote, your pool has just expanded all through the US, definitely through South America, maybe through Eastern Europe, Egypt. I'm just talking about time zone wise, right? So if you mandate an in-office work environment, you're losing out on all that talent pool. So that's one talent pool you completely lose out on. The other talent pool is, people who need to take time off because they're having children or they need to care for young children. That's, if you just ignore those people, right? Because they have to choose between work and taking care of young children, then you're losing the diversity in that workplace completely, right? Like, so you are now stuck with very similar looking people and similar type of people. And what is the opportunity cost of doing that, right? Like, you don't have cultural diversity because you're like all in the same area coming from the same place. You don't have diversity of viewpoints because you're all people who don't have young children who need care and stuff like that. And the third thing you're losing out on is this, what you mentioned, this long commutes means that people, if you think of the old days, I pretty much worked and probably took care of children. That's it. My whole life for that 15 years is a blur in my mind. I can't even think of all the different things that I could have been learned. Nothing, right? Like, you're just doing the bare minimum to get by. And now I'm learning Spanish on Duolingo. I'm running. I'm listening to a ton of podcasts. I'm volunteering at many different political rallies. All kinds of things are in my life right now, and I think that richness, not just for me but even other people, that richness informs their work. We can't just say we are boxes that we just bring, only our work self to work, right? Because all that richness has a positive impact on work. So I hear Melissa when she says that, young people, yes, that's a concern. And I've been thinking about it too, because I have a 19-year-old who says, I really don't like working remotely. I don't want to sit in front of a computer. I think about that, and that's an issue that we need to think about. But for the most people, like people who have worked in the other world, there are these opportunity costs that will be lost if you mandated everybody to come back to work.
I mean, that is so much good stuff. So I appreciate everyone's answers on that. I think one thing that's important to kind of say out loud is that, for the most part, your average professional joins some sort of line of work to make an impact. And the ability to integrate that desire for impact into your work and your life really, I would argue, really probably helps get that employee a lot more sticky within the organization. Because if you can integrate your work and your life and still have enough time to do all the things that you enjoy versus basically just working to live, or some version, I always get that screwed up, but basically, like Viji, what you described is basically what I experience. Wake up, go to work or commute, go to work, come home, have an hour with the kids and pass out. That sounds terrible. So I want to switch gears a little bit and really dig into the culture part of the conversation. So, yeah, I think Melissa, you hit on this, but I'm going to open it up to everybody. Ali, I'll start with you. When you're thinking about building that culture, and Melissa called out a great point about, hey, when we were all younger, we grew up in an environment where we had happy hours or some stuff like that were happening on a regular basis. So in this new world of work where we're hybrid or remote, what are some of the things that are challenging in terms of building that cohesive culture and probably getting some of that informal networking happening too? What are some of the things that you've done to facilitate that?
That's a great question. And I'll piggyback a bit of what Viji said. Like, I think it's the cultural differences that you have to kind of keep in mind and make sure you are addressing, let's say. So unfortunately, like for example, in Mexico, there's a very machismo culture that happens there, right? And it's actually similar in Korea too. So knowing that head on and making sure that somebody joins as an intern doesn't mean they don't get to speak up about an idea or thought they had when I don't know, chief marketing officer is talking, right? Like that's the kind of facilitation I like to do, very particularly to show that I want you to be bold. I want you to say things whether you're right or wrong, and let's validate it. Like I don't know the final answer. Like you might teach me. And that's the kind of culture I spread with my team everywhere. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Like, you know how to do it more than I do. And you learned how to do it more than I could have ever. Right. So like showing that kind of, let's say, pathway to growth and to leapfrogging positions or leapfrogging, I don't want to say titles, but like mid-level, mid-career, like entry-level, like senior kind of perspective in terms of output and hard work is a really hot topic for me, because we bring in a lot of people consistently, and I always want to make sure that they can see themselves in 3 months and see that, wow, I've started here and got there. And then I don't just do it myself. I use examples like, hey Maria, can you tell Lily where you were when we started and where you've come now? Like how every sales call we have, what is the first thing they say? Oh, we love your persistence. Like, thank you for sending me those 30 emails that got me on this call. Like, I really appreciate that. Right? Like that's the kind of incentives I like to like award or clap to, because that makes it a levels the playing field. And even in the cultural standpoint, it's bulletproof, right? Like I did the same thing in Korea, and we have our first employee there, and we're seeing the same things, like where somebody's short and it's a woman, and it's not very common for them to speak up in Korea because there is some divides. But I'm like, hey, don't worry about that. We'll break that through. We'll break through that barrier, right? And I believe in you, and like give all that faith, right? So I think it's really important to once again go back to that trust and faith, but invest in the growth potential and use that as really where they could be, and that growth potential equals the social impact you're generating, right?
Great stuff, Ali. I think if I'm bumper stickering what you just said, I think one of the biggest things that came out of it is you gotta be deliberate about saying stuff out loud. So that's one bumper sticker. And then the other part is you have to be deliberate about breaking down your psychological size. Title and role doesn't matter. You have to say that stuff out loud. Say, hey, every idea, we're going to examine it. We're going to try to figure it out and move forward. That's great stuff. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Melissa, what are some of the challenges that you've seen when it comes to building culture in these remote hybrid setups? And then how have you handled, overcoming those challenges? What are some best practices that you would share?
Yeah, one that I was trying to think of ones that are unique, because I totally think everything Ali just gave was spot on. I'm trying to think of something else unique. And one of the ones that came to me was, let me see if I can phrase this right. The challenge is, I find people not knowing whether they're bringing their work self or their whole self. I think you will also see, online, plenty of discussion around like, we don't talk about this at work, or of course I would talk about this at work. It's like a spectrum, right? And I think that's a challenge, because the way that I approach it as a leader, and as we're trying to build a gated, I feel like we're doing pretty well of this, is make space for both. Like if you say we're never going to talk about our personal selves at work, it's going to lead to some issues. And if you say we're going to have icebreakers with every meeting, and we're going to, instead of talking about the project, we're going to talk about each other before we start, that's also going to bring problems. And so what I think is generally a better solution is to find really clear and communicate this moments where we're all here. If this is work focused, stand up, it's project based, or moments. And I can give a couple of like things that we do, but you could come up with your own to bring your whole self. So 2 of those that we do are, one, we use a fun tool called Donut. You could also, if you're small scale, you can do it yourself. It just matches people up, and they have conversations that are non-work related conversations. I had one the other day with my direct report. And we started going into work, and I said, no, we are not talking about work here. And we went and talked about the concerts that we'd just been to, actually setting time that is literally non-work time to connect people, because then they don't feel like they're missing it in those work meetings that go right to an agenda. I think that's a really good one. The other one is we have lunch and learns on a monthly basis, and we invite either our advisors or employees or other people to come and present a topic. But so far, it's been the employees who say, like, I would love to share about this. This is something I know. It's something I do. Viji can come and give Spanish lessons to us from all of her Duolingo. But it's just finding opportunities where people can bring their whole self, so that they don't either, have a chip on their shoulder or feel sad that they can't do it in a work meeting, I think is one nice trick. So you're not saying don't bring yourself. You're just saying, let's get to know each other as humans during certain places. And then certain other meetings are, we're going to jump right in and get work done and stay focused on productivity. I don't know. I guess the bumper sticker would be, find concrete times for both, humans and productivity.
Yeah. And that's certainly solid stuff too. I mean, I think one of the things that you're talking about is creating spaces for all sorts of different types of interaction amongst the team. And I think what stood out to me, and this is just my nerd factor coming in, is you've actually, without saying it out loud, you've created spaces for a learning culture too. Because if you're having regular lunch and learns as part of your operating rhythm as an organization, that's important too, because every employee it joins the world of work to like advance their skills. So if you've operationalized that learning culture internally, that's a great aspect of culture build as well. Viji, what are some of the things that you've done when it comes to building, seeing cultural challenges, seeing challenges when it comes to cultural builds, and then overcoming those?
Some of these things are really basic, but often overlooked. But when I worked with teams, some remote team in China and Eastern Europe, sometimes people wouldn't turn on their cameras. So especially engineers. So this is, to me, that's super important, that as it is, you have such a limited view into somebody's world. And if you don't even turn on the camera and just, do a phone only conversation, even in India, actually, it was true. Maybe it's, internet issues, whatever, but to me, that's like super important, that you need to be able to turn on the camera. As it is, a lot of our conversation is on Slack or, like not really face to face. But the few meetings that we do have, I insist that everybody turn on the camera. And actually, that's the culture in our organization. That's really important. The other thing is to be able to, it kind of ties to what Melissa was saying, to be able to bring your authentic self. It's really important, because now, again, you have very limited face-to-face. And in that, you want to make sure that you are providing an opportunity for people to talk authentically about how they're feeling or what they're doing. Like, and that's, you need to kind of set it up in such a way that they do it, So it may be like, if you knew me questions, or, something else to start off, to kick off a meeting. Like, if you knew me, this is how I was feeling today. I'm feeling down. I'm feeling great. I'm feeling whatever. And it doesn't need to take long. It's just a minute, go round robin and just finish that up. And then everybody kind of, that sets the stage for the meeting. And then everybody knows how everybody else is feeling, how the day was going, whatever. So those are just a couple of things to add to what Melissa and Ali were talking about.
I gotta jump back in with one more that I totally thought of, which I'm guessing both Viji and Ali could tell me right away, and Jim as well. You could probably tell me what your company values are like right now today. Ours are focused, connected, and curious, to Jim's point about curious, like discovering. And I think one of the really good ways to build culture is to always tie back to your company values. Because if you're really staking a claim and those are the values, it's probably why people interviewed with you. It's probably why you hired people. And whatever they bring from their authentic self, tying that all into this like shared set of values, I think can go a long way to bringing people together. That's the other trick I would drop out there.
Really solid stuff. And you're dead on. I think from the beginning of the conversation through this point, everybody's kind of tied back into sort of fundamental principles in terms of how you build strong cultures. You know, you got to lead with trust. You got to assume positive intent. You got to build collaboration. You have to build relationships. So all of this stuff is really solid. I want to bring it, sort of full circle and really get into a little bit of a conversation about some of the best practices when we're talking about things that you've done and that you've experienced in terms of building a strong remote culture. So I'm gonna open with I'll have Viji lead on this one. I think this is a good one for you, Viji, because you've been in I think for 20 years you've been in organizations that have had high social impact. When you look at some of the best practices that you've seen in building culture in remote and hybrid environments, what are one or two things that you feel particularly strong about?
One of the things is being able to balance async and face-to-face meeting time. If you lean too heavily one way or the other, especially in a remote working group, then it may not work. So you need to find that right balance. So for example, in the engineering world, a 15-minute stand-up is the norm, right? So you just go round robin and just go through your 15-minute stand-up thing. It works well when you have a co-located agile team, but no longer do we have co-located agile teams. And so how do you adapt the 15-minute stand-up to this remote world? So one of the things we have done is actually do the 15, or even actually we take less than that to do the initial, this is what I worked on yesterday, this is what I plan to work on today, these are my roadblocks. And then very quickly after that, we actually have an update section where people are giving updates on whatever is happening, and then it could be personal, professional life, that I'm out because my child has a doctor's appointment, whatever. So you get a little bit of a glimpse, and then we actually have a parking lot, and this is in a face-to-face meeting, so we actually go through, dig into some of these items that anybody and everybody can add to that parking lot. So some of these kind of small tweaks in having most of the communication happen async on Slack, but also having like a more structured meeting to have a face-to-face really helps. And then turning on the camera, as I mentioned, is super important for these meetings. And then also there are bringing in the cultural aspect. There are people who will not speak up, or they'll not mention, they really look stressed in the meeting. So I do coach them outside of the meetings and say, hey, where the time when you spoke about this, that really helped, people could connect with you a little bit more. I saw the nods, or whatever the case may be, right? Or sometimes people are not understanding the accent, so that's a big issue, right? So maybe you can speak a little bit louder, clearer. And also all the equipment, sometimes it's you can't hear the person clearly. So these small annoyances, if they're not fixed, addressed, they do add barriers to this building that culture. So we have to pay attention to these small things and really address them, make sure that everybody is feeling that connection.
Melissa, what would you add to what Viji said?
Yeah, you kind of asked what we've learned. I was going a little bit more toward maybe something that we didn't do right and then we learned from it, which was, I think we all have talked about how communication and good communication is important. One of the things that we went out hard with was company norms. We're going to set the norms. This is what we're going to do. Here's how they're going to go. And I heard this awesome metaphor yesterday, or it was kind of a story about an exercise that someone had done, which is It was at an offsite. They learned cup stacking. You guys know what that is, where the cup stack? She basically said, we stacked the cups and then we wrote down what we learned and then we tried it again, wrote down what we learned, tried it again. And by doing it first, you start to learn what works, and then you observe and you add. And I think, personal story, I think we went out too hard with norms, and we're like, we just put down a bunch of rules and suggestions that people may or may not, jive with. And okay, it's good to get them down. The key though is observing and evolving what those norms are. So letting people do what works and then see that and then put it in. Like one thing we've discovered in the last month, our team kind of came up with it on their own, is that little huddle feature in Slack where you just leave it open and you can talk. A few people, there's one group, especially the design and UX group, has been leaving it open so that they basically are making noise, and they can be like, hey, so-and-so, what are you, they're working separately, but they're just leaving open voice channels. I would have never said that would work, but they're really enjoying it. So I think the key to observe what works and then make that your norms is a really good learning. Take that from my non-success. Oh, I guess now it's a success, but
yeah, I'm gonna bumper sticker that just like anything else. What you're talking about is prescription before diagnosis is malpractice, which is exactly how I took what you said. So that's brilliant. It's great stuff. Ali, what are the things that you would suggest as establishing in terms of best practices when it comes to culture build?
Yeah, I mean, I'll piggyback off Melissa. Definitely over communicate. I think it's pretty important to make sure things are not taken up for interpretation, and always be a very positive beam of light to every department, and also have positivity in constructive feedback. Always have positivity, because it's already hard to work alone and feel like it's an unsurmountable task, right? So sometimes people who are growing, and I deal with humongous amounts of growth, people who just used to work in the corporate world in a foreign country, and then making them thrive in a startup world in the US, which is so competitive, right? So I think that's really has worked really well for me, to the point I call myself sometimes a chief cheerleader officer. I love doing that. And then on the flip side, I would say I like to be very not funny, but I like to make people laugh, smile, make jokes when we have serious meetings. And it doesn't dilute the seriousness of the meeting. It just makes the meeting that much more fun. And that's also true to our customers. We were at a booth in a hospital security conference, and we had these bouncy balls that had the Kwema logo on it. It's a Kwema Smart Badge Reel, and everybody's super serious in suits. We were in pink, bright polos, and this one of our team members called Reed knows how to juggle. So he was there juggling these bouncy lighty balls, and this other prospect came and said, "Oh, I know how to juggle too." And then he was there juggling with Reed, and people remember that. They came to me after and said, "You guys are juggling, having fun. I don't even know what you guys do, but I'd love to work with you." Right? That's the kind of aura you want to have, right? And that also translates to success to a certain degree, right? Even if you're not doing things right, you will get to people who will tell you how things might be right. You know what I mean? So those are two things that I feel are so important for culture, both obviously in person and virtually.
So good stuff, Ali. I think one of the things that caught my attention was your comment about the pink polo shirts. And I'm not going to speak for Viji, but with our skin tone, pink really pops. So it is a great color choice. So I'm a big fan of that. So good stuff. Before we shut down, I want to make sure that the audience knows where we can find everybody. So Ali, let's lead off with you. Where can people find you and learn more about Kwema? Drop us your details, and we'll move to Melissa and Viji after that.
Yeah, so Kwema is pretty self-explanatory, kwema.co, or you can just Google us. We'll probably pop up on several different websites. And yeah, I'm happy to get LinkedIn requests as well. Happy to always connect and pay it forward, or learn from a thing or two from folks around the world. So yeah, thanks.
Awesome. We are Gated. So if you want to see the product that I work on, it's gated, GATED.com. And I'm kind of a podcast junkie recently, not just the listening, the making. So if you're excited, I've got two. One is by Gated. It's called Finding Focus. And I'd love people to listen to it because it's all about how people focus in a distracted world. And then my pet project is I am very passionate about startup marketing and just how messy and chaotic it is. So I've started a new podcast called Two Pizza Marketing, and it's just really candid conversations about what marketing looks like on the ground floor. Yeah, check out those podcasts if you would, and then definitely check out Gated.
I'm a bad influence on you, Melissa. And for anybody that is listening that wants to connect with Melissa, her story about where Two Pizza Marketing came from as a name is pretty interesting. So if you want to be relevant and not spam somebody's inbox, that would be something that I would ask if I'm connecting with Melissa. Viji, how about you? Where can people find you?
So I'm at VoiceOps, voiceops.com, and on LinkedIn, really. So I don't do too much social media. I try to kind of, it's overwhelming sometimes. So I just stick to LinkedIn. That's about it.
Awesome. So I would encourage everybody that's listening and watching to connect with all three of these great tech leaders. You definitely learn a lot. They have a lot of great content that they put out. So I would definitely encourage that. For those of you who have checked us out on the Talent Strategy 60 show, thanks for tuning in. Some great questions and feedback in the chat. So we appreciate that. Certainly in terms of finding me, you're watching the show. So you can find me here. I'm all over LinkedIn. I'm occasionally on TikTok. I'm not on Instagram because that's for food pics, but you can certainly check me out at Circa as well. And we appreciate you joining us. And hopefully the show was you learned a lot. And tune in next week for another great episode. Thanks again. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.